Have you ever noticed how quickly we accept our worst thoughts as truth? A thought appears in our mind for a few seconds, and somehow it gains authority over our entire day. We make decisions because of it. We change our behavior because of it. We avoid opportunities because of it. We start believing things about ourselves that were never proven, never tested, and often never true. What's fascinating is that we would never treat other people this way. Imagine a friend walks into the room and says, "I think I'm a failure." Most of us would immediately ask, why? We would look for evidence. We would challenge the statement. We would remind them of their accomplishments. We would help them see the situation from a broader perspective. But when the voice comes from inside our own heads, we rarely ask questions. We simply accept it. I am not smart enough. I always mess things up. I will never succeed. Nobody believes in me. And because the voice sounds like us, we assume it must be telling the truth. But here's the problem. Your thoughts are not your identity. Just because you think something does not make it real. A thought is an event. It is not a definition. Think about the sky for a moment. Clouds move across it every day. Some are light and beautiful. Some are dark and threatening. Some bring storms. Some disappear within minutes. But regardless of what cloud passes overhead, the sky remains the sky. The sky does not become the storm. And yet many of us spend our lives becoming the storm. We confuse what passes through our minds with who we actually are. The moment a negative thought appears, we attach ourselves to it. Instead of saying, "I am experiencing doubt," we say, "I am weak." Instead of saying, "I made a mistake," we say, "I am a failure." Instead of saying, "I feel afraid," we say, "I am incapable." Notice the difference. One describes a temporary experience. The other creates a permanent identity. An identity is powerful because once we believe something about ourselves, we begin acting in ways that support that belief. A person who believes they are incapable stops volunteering for challenges. A person who believes they are not talented stops learning new skills. A person who believes they are destined to fail stops trying, not because they actually lack ability, but because they have accepted a thought as a fact. The greatest limitation many people face is not a lack of opportunity. It's a mistaken identity. Years ago, researchers conducted studies showing that people often perform according to what they believe about themselves. Expectations influence behavior. Behavior influences results. Results reinforce expectations. It becomes a cycle. If I think I'm not good enough, I hesitate. When I hesitate, my performance suffers. When my performance suffers, I use that as proof that I was right all along. And the cycle continues. But the cycle began with a thought, not a truth. This matters because every human being experiences negative thoughts. The most successful leaders do, the most confident athletes do, the most accomplished entrepreneurs do. The difference is not that they never hear the voice. The difference is that they don't surrender authority to it. They understand something many people forget. The mind generates thoughts automatically. Some are useful, some are nonsense, some are based on facts, some are based on fear, and it is our responsibility to know the difference. Imagine walking through an airport and hearing every announcement over the loudspeaker. You wouldn't assume every message was intended for you. Listen, evaluate, and decide whether it was relevant. Yet when thoughts appear in our minds, we often assume every single one deserves attention. Every fear, every insecurity, every doubt, every criticism. We treat them as commands instead of suggestions. And that's where suffering begins. Because once a thought becomes an identity, it becomes difficult to separate ourselves from it. Someone says, "You made a mistake." No problem. But if I've already convinced myself that I am a mistake, those words hit differently. Someone rejects an idea. No problem. But if I've convinced myself that I am inadequate, that rejection feels like confirmation. The external event isn't what hurts us most. It's the internal story attached to it. The first step toward freedom is recognizing that you are the observer of your thoughts, not the product of them. You can watch a thought arrive without inviting it to stay. You can acknowledge doubt without becoming doubtful. You can experience fear without becoming fearful. You can hear criticism without accepting it as your identity. This doesn't mean pretending negative thoughts don't exist. It means refusing to let them define who you are. So every person in this room has thoughts they didn't choose. Every person has moments of insecurity. Every person has experienced self-doubt. That doesn't make you broken. That makes you human. The question is not whether negative thoughts will appear. They will. The question is whether you will build your identity around them. Will you allow a temporary emotion to become a permanent label? Will you allow one difficult moment to define an entire future? Will you allow fear to tell you who you are? Or will you remember that thoughts come and go, but your character is built through choices? Because character is not determined by what enters your mind. Character is determined by what you do next. And the moment you realize that a thought is not an identity, something remarkable happens. You create space. Space between stimulus and response. space between fear and action, space between doubt and decision, and inside that space you regain control. Stop becoming every thought that passes through your mind. You stop handing over your future to your fears. Stop defining yourself by your worst moments. Instead, you begin defining yourself by your values, your actions, and your willingness to keep moving forward despite uncertainty. And that is where real confidence begins. Not when negative thoughts disappear, but when they no longer have the power to decide who you are. Have you ever noticed how a single thought can completely change the direction of your day? You wake up feeling fine. Nothing terrible has happened. Nothing has gone wrong. But then one thought enters your mind. What if I fail? And suddenly everything begins to look different. You hesitate before sending the email. You doubt yourself before speaking up. Overthink a decision that should have taken seconds. The thought itself lasted only a moment, but the story that followed can last for hours, days, or even years, and that's the danger. Most people don't suffer because of a single thought. They suffer because of the story they build around it. Think about it. A thought is usually simple. I'm not ready, but then the story begins. I'm not ready because I'm not experienced enough. I'm not experienced enough because I've always been behind. I've always been behind because I'm not as talented as other people. I'm not as talented as other people, so I'll probably never succeed. What started as one passing thought has now become a complete narrative about your future. And here's what makes this so dangerous. The mind is incredibly persuasive when it tells stories. It can make assumptions feel like facts. It can make fears feel like certainty. It can make possibilities feel like predictions. The human brain is designed to create meaning. It wants explanations. It wants patterns. It wants to connect dots. The problem is that sometimes it connects dots that were never connected in the first place. Someone doesn't return your call. Immediately the story starts. They must be upset with me. Then another chapter is added. I probably said something wrong. Then another, I always ruin relationships. Then another, people eventually leave. Within minutes, created an entire novel based on absolutely no evidence. The event was neutral. The story created the suffering. This happens in every area of life. A setback becomes proof that you're unlucky. A rejection becomes proof that you're unworthy. A mistake becomes proof that you're incapable. A criticism becomes proof that you're not enough. The facts remain small. The story becomes enormous. And the longer we repeat that story, the more believable it becomes. Psychologists often talk about repetition and belief. The more frequently we hear something, the more likely we are to accept it as true. This applies not only to messages from the outside world, but also to messages we repeat to ourselves. If you tell yourself every day that you're not capable, eventually your brain stops questioning the statement. It simply accepts it. Not because it's true, because it's familiar, and familiarity can be deceptive. Many people spend years living inside stories they never consciously chose. Stories created during moments of disappointment. Stories created during moments of embarrassment. Stories created during moments of fear. A student fails one exam and begins telling a story about being unintelligent. An entrepreneur experiences one failed business and begins telling a story about being incapable. A person experiences heartbreak and begins telling a story about being unlovable. Notice what happens. A single event becomes an identity. A moment becomes a definition. And definitions are powerful because they influence behavior. If I believe I'm bad at public speaking, I'll avoid opportunities to speak. Because I avoid speaking, I never improve. Because I never improve, I continue believing I'm bad at speaking. The story creates the outcome. The outcome reinforces the story, and the cycle continues. This is why the second step toward escaping your worst thoughts is learning to interrupt the story before it gains momentum. Because stories are easiest to stop at the beginning. Once they grow, they become harder to challenge. It's similar to a snowball rolling down a mountain. At the top, it's small, easy to stop, easy to redirect. But if you wait until it's halfway down the hill, it becomes much more difficult. Negative thinking works the same way. The earlier you recognize the story forming, the easier it is to prevent it from taking control. The challenge is that many of us don't even realize we're telling stories. We think we're observing reality. But there's a difference between facts and interpretation. The fact might be, I didn't get the promotion. The story might be, I'll never be successful. The fact might be, my presentation didn't go well. The story might be, I'm terrible at leadership. The fact might be, someone criticized my work. The story might be, I'm not good enough. Facts are objective. Stories are subjective. Facts can guide growth. Stories often create limitations. The most effective leaders, athletes, performers, and high achievers understand this distinction. They don't ignore reality. They simply refuse to exaggerate it. When something goes wrong, they ask, what happened? Not what's wrong with me. When they fail, they ask, what can I learn? Not, why am I a failure? When they face obstacles, they ask, what's the next step? Not, why does this always happen to me? The quality of their questions changes the quality of their stories. And the quality of their stories changes the quality of their lives. Imagine how different your future could be if you stopped treating every challenge as evidence against yourself. Imagine if setbacks became lessons instead of labels. Imagine if mistakes became feedback instead of definitions. Imagine if difficult moments became chapters instead of conclusions. Because that's what they are, a chapter. Not the whole story. The truth is that every great achievement you've ever admired involved moments that could have been interpreted negatively. Every successful person has experienced rejection. Every leader has experienced doubt. Every creator has produced work that failed. Every athlete has lost competitions. Every entrepreneur has faced setbacks. The difference is that they didn't allow temporary circumstances to become permanent narratives. They interrupted the story. They refused to let one moment determine the meaning of all the others. And that's the invitation for all of us. The next time a negative thought enters your mind, pay attention to what follows. Watch the story begin. Notice the assumptions. Notice the conclusions. Notice how quickly the mind jumps from one event to an entire identity. And then ask yourself a simple question. Is this a fact or is this a story? That question alone can change everything. Because once you recognize the story, regain the ability to rewrite it. And the moment you stop believing every story your mind creates is the moment you stop becoming your worst thought. You begin becoming something far more powerful. You become the author instead of the audience. You become the editor instead of the victim. And from that position, you can choose a different narrative, built not on fear, but on truth, growth, resilience, and possibility. One of the most important questions you can ever ask yourself is this: what evidence do I actually have for what I'm believing right now? It sounds simple. In fact, it sounds almost too simple. But most of the negative thoughts that control our lives survive because we never challenge them. We never put them on trial. We never ask them to prove their case. We simply accept their verdict. Imagine a courtroom where the prosecutor walks in, makes an accusation, provides no evidence whatsoever, and the judge immediately declares the defendant guilty. No questions, no investigation, no witnesses, no facts, just a conclusion. We would never call that justice. Yet every day, many of us allow our minds to operate exactly this way. A thought appears, you're not good enough. And without questioning it, we accept the sentence. Another thought appears, you're going to fail. Again, no evidence is requested. No cross-examination takes place. No alternative explanation is considered. The mind makes a claim and we immediately believe it. The truth is that negative thoughts are often terrible lawyers. They're emotional. They exaggerate. They ignore evidence. They focus only on information that supports their argument. And most importantly, they rarely tell the whole story. Think about how often this happens. You make one mistake and suddenly your mind says, you always mess things up. Always? Really? Every single time? Of course not. But the mind uses extreme language because extreme language creates stronger emotions. Or perhaps you experience a setback and your mind says, you'll never succeed. Never? How could anyone possibly know that? The future hasn't happened yet. The statement isn't based on evidence. It's based on fear. And fear is a terrible predictor of reality. The challenge is that when emotions become strong, they often disguise themselves as facts. The stronger the emotion, the more convincing the thought appears. Fear feels true, doubt feels true, insecurity feels true. But feelings are not always facts. A person standing on a stage before thousands of people may feel terrified. That doesn't mean they're incapable. A business owner launching a new idea may feel uncertain. That doesn't mean the idea will fail. Someone beginning a new chapter in life may feel unprepared. That doesn't mean they are unqualified. The feeling is real. The conclusion is not necessarily real, and that's where growth begins. Growth begins when we separate evidence from emotion. Because when we do that, something remarkable happens. We discover that many of the beliefs holding us back are built on very weak foundations. Let's say someone believes they aren't a good leader. Why? Maybe because a project didn't go well. Maybe because a team member criticized them. Maybe because they made a poor decision 6 months ago. Now ask yourself something. Would you evaluate an entire leadership career based on one difficult moment? Of course not. Yet that's exactly what many people do. They collect one piece of negative evidence and ignore hundreds of pieces of positive evidence. They remember the criticism and forget the praise. They remember the failure and forget the progress. They remember the mistake and forget the growth. The mind has a tendency to highlight threats. Thousands of years ago, this helped human beings survive. Paying attention to danger kept our ancestors alive. But in the modern world, that same tendency can create distorted thinking. We become experts at noticing what's wrong while overlooking what's right. We remember embarrassment longer than achievement. We replay failures more often than victories. And eventually, we develop beliefs that aren't supported by reality. They're supported by selective memory. That's why questioning your thoughts is so powerful. Not because every negative thought is false. Some contain useful information. Some reveal areas where improvement is needed. Some point toward important lessons. But even useful criticism deserves examination. The goal is not blind positivity. The goal is accuracy. If a thought is true, evidence will support it. If a thought is false, evidence will expose it. Either way, investigation helps. Imagine someone says, "I'm not capable." Okay, let's examine the evidence. Have they overcome challenges before? Have they learned difficult skills? Have they survived hard seasons? Have they adapted to change? Have they solved problems? Have they helped others? Have they grown over time? The answer for most people is yes. Which means the original statement isn't entirely true. And if it isn't entirely true, it shouldn't be treated as absolute truth. The strongest leaders are not people who never experience self-doubt. They are people who refuse to let self-doubt go unquestioned. They understand that confidence is not built by believing everything you think. Confidence is built by knowing which thoughts deserve your trust. And trust should always be earned. Think about that. We often require evidence before trusting other people. We require consistency. We require proof. We require reliability. When it comes to our own negative thoughts, we often give them instant credibility. No questions asked. No evidence required. No verification needed. The result is predictable. We become prisoners of assumptions. We limit ourselves based on beliefs that have never been tested. We avoid opportunities because of fears that have never been proven. We surrender dreams because of conclusions that were never validated. But everything changes when you begin asking better questions. Instead of saying, "What if I fail?" ask, "What evidence suggests I can't handle this?" Instead of saying, "I'm not good enough," ask, "Compared to what standard?" Instead of saying, "I always mess things up," ask, "Is that actually true, or am I focusing on one experience?" Instead of saying, "I can't do this," ask, "What proof do I have that I can't learn?" These questions interrupt automatic thinking. They create space for truth. And truth is powerful because truth is often far more hopeful than fear. Fear says you're stuck. Evidence often shows you've grown. Fear says you're weak. Evidence often shows you've survived. Fear says you'll fail. Evidence often shows you've overcome difficult things before. Fear tells a story of limitation. Evidence tells a story of possibility. And possibility is where transformation begins. Because the moment you start demanding evidence from your worst thoughts, they begin losing their authority. Not all at once, not overnight, but gradually. You stop treating assumptions like facts. Stop treating emotions like predictions. You stop treating temporary setbacks like permanent identities. And in their place, begin building something stronger. A relationship with reality. A relationship with truth. A relationship with yourself that is based on facts rather than fear. Because your future deserves to be shaped by what is real, not by what is imagined. And when you learn to question the thoughts that once controlled you, you discover something extraordinary. Many of them were never powerful on their own. They only seemed powerful because they were never challenged. The moment you ask for evidence, the moment you demand proof, the moment you become curious, instead of fearful, you take back control. Is the moment your worst thoughts stop acting like masters and start becoming what they always should have been, just thoughts. There is something interesting about the human mind. When we're struggling, our first instinct is often to go inward. We retreat. We isolate. We convince ourselves that nobody would understand what we're feeling. We tell ourselves that this is our battle to fight alone. And at first, that seems reasonable. After all, if the problem exists inside our mind, shouldn't the solution be found there as well? But here's the challenge. The same mind creating the problem is often the mind trying to solve it. And when negative thoughts are left alone for too long, they tend to grow stronger. Not because they're true, because they go unchallenged. Imagine being locked in a room where one voice speaks to you all day long, hour after hour, day after day. The same opinions, the same fears, the same worries. Eventually, even if that voice was wrong, you'd start believing it simply because it was the only voice you heard. This is exactly what happens when people isolate themselves emotionally. The negative voice becomes the only voice in the room. And without another perspective, it begins to sound like truth. This is why connection matters so much. Not because other people can solve every problem for us, but because they can help us see what we can no longer see ourselves. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to give good advice to a friend? A friend comes to you and says, "I think I'm a failure." And immediately you see things they cannot see. You remind them of their strengths. You remind them of their progress. Remind them of obstacles they've already overcome. You see the bigger picture. But when it comes to your own life, that perspective often disappears. You become trapped inside the problem. Your vision narrows. Your fears become magnified. And your worst thoughts begin to feel undeniable. That's why we need people. Not because we're weak, because we're human. Beings were never designed to carry every burden alone. For thousands of years, survival depended on community. People lived in tribes. Families supported one another. Challenges were shared. Victories were shared. Losses were shared. Growth was shared. Connection wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. And although the world has changed dramatically, human nature has not. We still need connection. We still need support. We still need people who can remind us of who we are when we've temporarily forgotten. One of the greatest lies negative thinking tells us is this: keep it to yourself. The voice says, nobody cares, nobody will understand. Don't burden anyone. Figure it out on your own. And many people listen. They stay silent, they withdraw, they suffer privately. The tragedy is that silence often strengthens the very thing we're trying to escape, because unspoken fears tend to expand. They grow larger in isolation. What seems overwhelming inside your mind often becomes manageable the moment it's spoken aloud. Think about how many times you've worried about something for days, only to finally talk to someone and realize the situation wasn't nearly as hopeless as you imagined. The facts didn't change, the perspective did, and perspective changes everything. When we're trapped inside our own thoughts, we see only one angle. Connection introduces another angle, another viewpoint, another interpretation, another possibility. Sometimes all it takes is one conversation to break a cycle of thinking that has lasted for months. Not because the conversation magically solves everything, but because it reminds us that our thoughts are not always accurate. I once heard someone say that we cannot read the label when we're sitting inside the jar. And that's true. When we're too close to our own fears, our ability to see clearly becomes limited. Other people help us step outside the jar. They help us see the situation differently. They help us challenge assumptions. They help us recognize strengths we've overlooked. Most importantly, they remind us that we're not alone. And that reminder matters more than we often realize, because loneliness doesn't just affect emotions, it affects perception. Research consistently shows that isolation can intensify stress, anxiety, and negative thinking. When people feel disconnected, their problems often appear larger. Their fears appear more threatening. Their future appears more uncertain. Connection doesn't eliminate challenges, but it changes our relationship with them. A heavy weight feels different when someone helps carry it. The weight may still exist, but now you're not carrying it alone. The strongest people understand this. Notice I didn't say the strongest people never ask for help. I said the strongest people understand the value of connection. There is a misconception in our culture that strength means independence, that resilience means handling everything by yourself, that leadership means having all the answers. But if you study great leaders, discover something different. Great leaders build relationships. Great leaders seek counsel. Great leaders surround themselves with trusted people. Great leaders understand that wisdom grows through conversation. The same principle applies to personal growth. You don't become stronger by isolating yourself. Become stronger by connecting with people who help you grow. People who tell you the truth. People who challenge you. People who encourage you. People who believe in your potential even during moments when you struggle to see it yourself. And here's something important. Connection isn't only about receiving support. It's also about giving it. Because when we help others through their struggles, we often gain insight into our own. When we encourage someone else, we hear words we may need ourselves. When we remind someone else of their worth, we remember our own. Human beings are interconnected in ways we often underestimate. Our growth influences others. Their growth influences us. That's why communities matter. That's why friendships matter. That's why mentors matter. That's why family matters. Because every meaningful relationship becomes a mirror that reflects possibilities we cannot always see on our own. A mirror that helps us separate truth from fear. A mirror that reminds us of our values when our emotions become overwhelming. The goal is not to become dependent on others for confidence. The goal is to create healthy connections that reinforce reality. Because reality is often far kinder than the stories fear creates. Fear says you're alone. Connection proves you're not. Fear says nobody understands. Connection reveals that many people have walked similar paths. Fear says you're incapable. Connection reminds you of your strengths. Fear says give up. Connection reminds you why you started. And perhaps that's why some of the most transformational moments in life happen through conversations, not speeches, not books, not achievements, conversations. One person helping another see what they couldn't see before. One person reminding another that difficult seasons are temporary. One person refusing to let someone become their worst thought. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can hear isn't advice. It's simply the reminder that someone is standing beside us, that we're seen, that we're valued, that we're not carrying the weight alone. And when connection replaces isolation, something remarkable begins to happen. The voice of fear becomes quieter, the voice of truth becomes clearer, and the thoughts that once seemed powerful lose much of their influence. Not because they disappeared, but because they are no longer the only voice being heard. And that may be one of the most important steps toward becoming free from your worst thoughts. You stop listening to them alone. At some point, every person who wants to overcome negative thinking discovers a powerful truth. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You have to act your way into one. This may sound surprising because most people assume confidence comes first. They believe successful people act boldly because they feel confident. They believe courageous people take risks because they are fearless. They believe resilient people keep going because they possess some special mental strength that others don't have. But if you listen closely to the stories of extraordinary people, you often discover the opposite. The action came before the confidence. The courage appeared during the process, not before it. The belief was built through experience, and this matters because many people are waiting. Waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting to stop doubting themselves, waiting for fear to disappear, waiting for certainty to arrive. But certainty rarely arrives before action. Confidence is not the prerequisite. Confidence is the result. Think about a child learning to walk. No child waits until they feel completely confident before taking the first step. They stumble, they fall, they try again, they wobble, they fall again. And somehow they keep moving forward. If adults approached walking the same way they approach their dreams, most of us would never leave the floor. Imagine a toddler saying, "I fell 3 times. Clearly walking isn't for me." It sounds ridiculous. People do this every day with their goals. One failed attempt and they create an identity. One setback and they create a label. One disappointment, they conclude something about who they are. The problem is that negative thoughts become dangerous when they are reinforced by inaction. Let's say your mind says, "You're not capable." If you listen and avoid taking action, nothing challenges the belief. The thought survives. In fact, it grows stronger. Now imagine a different response. The thought says, "You're not capable." And you take a small action anyway. Learn a skill, you solve a problem, you complete a task, you make progress. Suddenly reality begins arguing against the thought. Actions provide evidence, and evidence changes identity. This is why habits are so important. Most people think habits exist to improve productivity. But habits do something much deeper than that. Habits shape identity. Every action becomes a vote for the person you're becoming. Every workout is a vote for being healthy. Every book you finish is a vote for being a learner. Every difficult conversation you have is a vote for being courageous. Every promise you keep to yourself is a vote for being trustworthy. The action may seem small, but the message it sends is powerful. It says, "This is who I am," not because you declared it, because you demonstrated it. The reason habits matter so much is because negative thoughts thrive in uncertainty. They thrive in spaces where there is no evidence. If your mind says you're incapable and you never take action, the belief remains unchallenged. But if your mind says you're incapable and you repeatedly prove otherwise through action, the belief begins losing credibility. This is how transformation happens. Not through one grand moment, not through one motivational speech, not through one breakthrough. Transformation happens through repeated actions that slowly build a new self-image. And here's the beautiful part. The actions don't have to be massive, they just have to be consistent. People often underestimate the power of small wins. We celebrate major achievements, big promotions, big business launches, big accomplishments. But confidence is rarely built during the big moments. Confidence is built during the ordinary moments nobody sees. The morning you get up when you don't feel like it. The workout you complete when motivation is absent. The chapter you read when distractions are everywhere. The project you continue even after making mistakes. The commitment you honor even when nobody would know if you quit. Those moments matter. Because every time you follow through, you send a signal to yourself. You begin developing trust. And trust is the foundation of confidence. Think about any relationship in your life. Trust isn't built through promises. Trust is built through consistency. People trust people who repeatedly do what they say they'll do. The same principle applies to your relationship with yourself. Constantly break promises to yourself, trust weakens. If you consistently keep promises to yourself, trust grows. And when trust grows, confidence follows. Many people are trying to think positively about themselves while simultaneously breaking commitments to themselves every day. The conflict becomes obvious. Their words say one thing, their actions say another. Real confidence comes when thoughts and actions begin aligning. Prove to yourself repeatedly that you can be counted on. This is why action is so powerful.